but I hope you can see my screen and you can hear me,
Yes,
so that I can start. Right. So, what we will be discussing about today, as I mentioned in the last lecture, are this coverage and rate and analysis of millimeter wave cellular networks. So it's from a different reference and from a paper, right? So the authors T by
sir. Sir, your
and Robert
voice
Heath.
is breaking,
Yeah.
I think.
You can't hear me, so let me just try to see if I can. So can everybody else hear me? There is some issue for
The
all.
voice is breaking in between actually.
Okay, so let me just try to disconnect and reconnect. Okay. Okay. I hope you can hear me now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is it? I hope it's better, right? Because if it's not, just let me know if you cannot hear me, and if it's still breaking, I can try to move to a different network. Okay. So yeah, the thing that we will be discussing today are coverage and rate analysis of millimeter wave cellular networks. We'll start discussing it today. Hopefully, we see if we can finish it today or not. Otherwise, we will complete it in the next class. So it's from a paper which I will also share with you in the classroom, and you can go through it. I mean yourself as well. But I think it will be easier for you to go through it once we do this class. Okay. So the authors of the paper are T. Bai and Robert Heath, and theirs was one of the first characterizations of millimeter wave cellular network that existed. Okay. So the three things that we discussed in the last class that are different in millimeter wave cellular networks, as far as as compared to other networks are concerned, was beam forming, right? And we will go into these concepts in a bit more detail today. The second was the modeling of blockages, and the third was the new model of fast fading. Right. Okay. So let's start with with the second one, which is that of blockages. And as I discussed, that the most generic models that exist in the literature model the probability of being in blockage as a function of distance. So what they do essentially is have a model something like this. So let me bring it down. Yeah. So suppose this is your typical user, right? And generally there would be many base station locations modeled as Poisson point processes, like the triangles here. And due to the buildings such as this, right? Don't worry about this at the moment. This is something which is happening indoor. But due to buildings such as this, it is more likely that base stations which are located farther from you, for example, like this, are in line of sight as compared are in non-line of sight as compared to the base stations which are near to you. So as a result, blockages are probabilistically modeled using an LOS probability. That means based on the distance of the point from the origin, so the probability that a BS located at some xi, right, is in line of sight is given by some p which is a function of the distance of that point from the origin, right? So in order to ease the notation a bit, let me denote xi I mean the distance of that point from the origin as simply r. So PR denotes the probability of being in line of sight for a node at a distance r, right? So naturally p of r would be a decreasing function of r, which means the more you go or the higher you go in r, the probability that you would be I mean you would be in line of sight decreases, right? But the first one of the first let's say observations that we would want to have, or that we have as compared to regular normal Poisson point processes. I mean, remember what PR is doing, right? So PR, if you have an instance of this Poisson point process, so let's say this black x's are the points of a Poisson point process, right? So what PR is doing is going to each of these points which are at distances r. Let's say this is r1, this is r2, this is r3, and so on. So r3 is probably the closest one. So you are going to each of these points and keeping it with the probability of PR and removing it with the probability of 1 minus PR, right? And you are doing it for all the points. Okay. So one of the first questions that arise is it possible that there are no line of sight base stations? Okay, I mean, of course, if you think about from a actual realization perspective or actual network perspective, of course it is possible, right? It would happen if in case there are blockages like this, and none of such base stations exist within the line of sight. I mean, of course such base stations would also not exist. So all the base stations would be behind the blockages, right? But we are moving away from that, let's say, individual realization perspective or individual network model perspective, and let's talk about only a from this perspective of, or the or an behind this abstraction of Poisson point processes, which means that if you have created a thinned Poisson point process in which you have removed and kept the points based on some probability PR, right? What is the probability, or is it possible that there are no line of sight base stations, or what is the probability that the typical user located at the origin actually observes no line of sight base stations? Okay. To answer this, let's start with a restricted domain, which means let's answer a smaller question: is what is the probability that the typical user observes no line of sight base station within a distance, let's call it x or r, let's say r, or let's say x. Okay, remember that in case there was no thinning happening, the probability that there are no base stations within a distance of x was simply e to the minus pi lambda x square, right? So e to the minus pi lambda x square is the probability that there are no points of the original Poisson point process within a distance of x. But now what we have done is we have put a mark, so to say, we have marked each of these points in a different way or in a non-homogeneous way, which means that depending on where this point is actually located from the origin, we have given it a different mark, and that mark being the p of r, right? As a result, we have been what we have with us is, even if we start with a parent point process of intensity lambda, right, what we have with us is a non-homogeneous Poisson point process. Although the parent point process phi was homogeneous, here we are the resultant point process of line of sight base stations is a non-homogeneous one with more densities near the origin, right? Because that those have more probability to be retained by this kind of activity, which is the marking of these points with this point with this probability, right? So I'll pause for a bit. I'll ask you to calculate this probability. Precisely, what is the probability that if you are considering a circle of radius x, right? And we let us call the modified point process phi L. So phi L is only the points which have been retained after doing the marking, or let's say you go to each of these point and not marking, but you go to each points and actually remove it with a probability 1 minus p and keep it with a probability of p, right? Which is also a function of r. After doing this activity, the points which have been left, let us call it, let us denote it by this red x. The task is to calculate the probability that a that there are at least one red x, or let's start with the probability that there are no red x points located within a distance of x. Is the question clear?
So this we have to calculate after thinning, right?
Yeah, you have to calculate the probability after thinning. And before thinning, of course, it is this, right? I mean, the probability that there are no points within x is simply e to the minus pi lambda x square. That's the void probability. Okay, I'll pause for 5 minutes. I'll ask you to calculate it, and then we can do it together. Okay. In case it is still not clear what you are supposed to do, you can please feel free to ask me. Okay.
And sir, we are dropping with probability PR, or are we retaining
We
with?
keep with probability PR. So remember, PR is the probability of being in line of sight for a node at a distance of r. So we are looking at all the points which are in line of sight, which means if we have gone to each of these points, we have said that okay, you are in line of sight with a probability p, and 1 minus line of sight, in non line of sight with a probability 1 minus p. So we only focus on the ones which are in line of sight. I mean, of course, the points which have been removed, right, they also become a new point process. Let's say the points which have been actually removed are given by this, right? They form the process of non-line of sight base stations. So let's call them phi n. But we are only interested at this moment and in this line of sight base stations, which is phi L. So you need to use some of the concepts which we have discussed in the previous office hours. Okay, which means you have to use probably the PDF of the distance of an individual point from the center. Any I mean, so how are you proceeding with it? Can anyone just give us a hint on how to do it?
Sir,
Mm-hmm.
if the probability to keep the point is p,
Yeah.
if it had been constant, then we could have simply used lambda times p. But
Mm-hmm.
since
Yes.
p is a function of r, we have to consider a point at a distance r in a disk of dr thickness and then try to integrate maybe.
Right. That's a good observation. Yes, the first one that is obvious, and that might sometimes be useful for us. Not particularly for this problem, but maybe for some other problem it would be useful for us. Is that if all of these points had some equal probability of being in line of sight and some different one minus that probability of being in non-line of sight, you would have simply found out found it out as the thinned process pi p lambda x square. So p lambda is now the intensity of the line of sight base stations. So this can only happen if p is not a function of distance and all the points have an equal probability p of being in line of sight. As Saradev has pointed out, now it is a function of distance. So let me start with a even simpler problem, right? So suppose I take this circle, right, and I think about only a single point, only a single point given by this red x, right? This single point, remember, each of such points is uniformly distributed inside the circle, right? So between 0 and x, right, in this circle, it is uniformly distributed. So can you tell me what would be the probability that such a point would be kept or removed? Let's start with kept. Or maybe let's start with removed, because we are trying to find out the probability that there are no line of sight base stations within x. So what is the probability that such a point, a single point, by the way, is removed?
So
Anyone?
it is removed if
Yeah.
P of probability of R is greater than probability that R is greater than X. Then it would
Probability that r is greater than x. So probability. So r, what is r?
be distance of that point.
So that's not necessarily true, right? We can also remove it if it is within x. Okay.
So
So
I
if
mean,
it is,
if it is within X, then it is in line of sight, right?
no, that's not what we said. So every point has a chance of being in line of sight and non-line of sight. The probability of being in line of sight is simply p of r, right? It means even if you take r equal to 1, right, meter, the probability of being in line of sight is simply this function evaluated at 1 meter. If you take r equal to 100 meters, right, you have a probability of being in line of sight given by the function's value at this 100 meters. I mean, of course, it's a decreasing function, something, yeah.
If the probability is P of R, then P of R should be a random variable,
Mhm.
and we can try to take an expectation of this over this region.
Okay, so can you tell me what it would be? Just to come back to Vaibhav's point, though, you are dealing with such a P of R. Okay, so just mention, I mean, just consider this, that even if you choose a distance, so this is probably 1. Okay, even if you choose a distance, let's say 10 meter, you have some probability of being in line of sight, let's say 0.7, and with probability 0.3 you are removed, which means you are in non-line of sight. But if you go to, let's say, 100 meters, now you have a probability of 0.1 to be in line of sight and 0.9 to be removed and making it non-line of sight. Okay, so this red x can be kept, can be removed regardless of its distance. It just matters that what probability it is kept, and that is what is a function of r. Did you get this point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, someone was mentioning that we can have an expectation over uh, the distance of this point. So okay, let's start with the first point, that if you are in at a distance of r, right? So let's call this, let's say, some dummy variable t. If you are at a distance of t, the probability that you are removed is 1 minus p of t. Everybody agrees with this point? So does anyone remember what is the PDF of t? We discussed it in the office hours, right? Yeah, 2t by x square. Yeah. So the probability that such a point, given that it is uniformly located inside the circle, is removed is given by integral of 0 to x 1 minus p of t, where t occurs with a probability of 2t by x square dt. Does everyone agree with this step? That this is the probability that a uniformly located point inside this circle of radius of x is removed. Okay, if everybody agrees with this point, now remember that when we are looking at this circle of radius of x, we could have started with no points of the parent point process, then also we would have ended up with no points inside the circle of the line of sight process. We could have started with 1 point of the parent point process, and it would have been possible that in the line of sight or phi L there is no point. We could have actually started with any number of points of phi and ended up with no points of phi L, right? So in case we had started with k points, right, the probability that all the k points, all similar k points have been removed, since each of the location of these points are independent of each other, the probability that k of these points have been removed is simply this to the power k. And if we average it out over all possibilities of k, where k goes from 0 to infinity, and the probability that phi in that ball of radius 0 to x was actually k, this gives us the probability that phi L, sorry, this is the probability that phi L inside the ball of radius 0 to x is equal to 0. Does everyone agree with this one, or there is some issue with someone? Is it fine for all? So we can vary k. Yes,
K.
Badri, you have a point.
Sir, K is representing what? K is the number of points within that X. So that
Right. So k is the number of points that we had started with of phi. Right. So suppose k equal to 0. So when k equal to 0, we don't have to multiply anything. When if we start with phi, no points in phi, we will have no points in phi L. If there is 1 point in phi, which means we start with 1 point of the parent point process, we just multiplied by the probability that 1 point have been removed. So k equal to 1. So if we start with 2 points, we have to multiply with the probability that both these points have been removed, considering that they individually these points could have been located anywhere inside this circle uniformly.
Okay, so phi could have any number of points, but the K is just within that ball of X of phi's points which are within that ball.
Right. So let me be a bit more consistent with the notation. So phi's intersection, remember I am using it as a counting measure now. So phi intersection with a ball of radius x with a center of 0 equal to k, which means that the number of points of phi, so phi is the parent point process from which we are deriving this line of sight and non-line of sight process individually. So phi is the parent point process, the number of points of phi located inside this ball of radius x with a center origin equal to k. The probability that we start with k points multiplied with the probability that all such k points have been removed, and we do it for all possible values of k.
Sir, that integral that we have, it is over dt, right? What's the dummy
Yeah,
variable?
yeah. Sorry. Yes. So it's the same thing, right?
Yes.
So this is the expression for one such point, and since each of these location of the points are independent from the other locations of these points, the probability that all of these points have been removed is simply a product of these k terms, and product of these k individual independent terms which are similar. It's just the same thing to the power k.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay. So can now someone work out what would be the final expression? So we have a summation of k goes from 0 to infinite, right? And some term which is 0 to x 1 minus pt of 2t by x square dt to the power k, and here we have exp of minus pi lambda x square to the power k by k factorial, right? This is simply the Poisson distribution. So this is the probability that you had actually started with k points of the parent point process phi, right? So something which is not a function of k at all, which is exp of minus pi lambda x square, goes outside the summation, and inside we have basically 0 to x 1 minus 2t by x square dt, so which is simply evaluates to 1, which is the you integrate the PDF over its entire domain, becomes 1 minus the integral of 0 to x pt, right, 2t by x square dt, and this you multiply with pi lambda x square and this stuff to the power k by k factorial. So I hope you have done one or two exercises like this. Do you remember? We have to use the series expansion of the e to the x. So e to the x is 1 plus x square by 2 factorial and so on. So what we have is exp of minus lambda pi x square multiplied by the exp of, what do we have? We have pi lambda x square minus 2 pi lambda integral of 0 to x pt dt dpt dt. Is it correct? I mean, just verify it. I'm just doing the multiplication right now. Okay. So which means we simply have exp of minus 2 pi lambda integral of 0 to x t pt dt. Did everyone get this?
Sir, we can replace the TPT dt by average.
Sorry?
The mean of t with respect to pt.
Right, that's the expected value of t with respect to pt. But pt is something which we have not yet discussed about. Okay, pt is simply one notation that I have introduced and not discussed what it actually is, right? But we will see what it is. Okay, so you can already see some special cases, right? So the special cases being, in case you are considering all the points to be in line of sight, which means pt equal to 1 for any t, right? So if you put pt equal to 1 for any t, you get back the e to the power minus pi lambda x square, right? That's the probability that you start with no points of the parent point process inside the thing, right? In case all the points are non-line of sight, you simply get 1 because pt equal to 0, which means all the points are in non-line of sight. So the probability that you get no such points inside the circle which are in line of sight is equal to 1. So two special cases being pt equal to 1 for all t and pt equal to 0 for all t. Okay, but and for this I will just upload a reference and not go into the details of where it is derived from, but it has been proven that for urban cellular networks, and this is just a result that I will state, but we will not use it in our course. It's just to make you aware of what actual form pt has. So it has been proven that the number of points of blockages, or let's say the number of blockages between any 2 points in an urban cellular network is Poisson distributed. It's just a I mean, you can think about it as a footnote. I'll upload the reference for it, but this is something which we will not be using. Just it follows that the probability that you are at a line of sight at a distance of r varies as or decreases as exponential of r. So this is the let's say the actual value of PR, how it varies in urban cellular networks, which means you can think about a point which is exactly located at your location. It has a probability of being in line of sight to be 1, and it decreases exponentially as you go with distance, right? So this is e to the minus beta r. What is beta? Beta is a parameter that depends on density and heights and sizes of the blockages. Of sight, something like this. But in case you are looking at more rural areas, you would be looking at this. So this is something which you would think about in a rural area, and this is something which you would get in an urban area, right? So this parameter beta is the one which controls how sharply it decreases, and it just dictates what is the probability of being in line of sight, how quickly it degrades as you move in R. But we will not be using this formula because it leads to much more complicated expressions. What I would be focusing on today is an abstraction called the LOS ball. So what is the LOS ball? LOS ball is simply represented by a distance dl such that the probability to be in line of sight is equal to 1 if r is less than that distance, and it's 0 when r is greater than that distance. Okay, so dl naturally is tagged to beta. So dl depends on beta, which means higher the beta, which means more dense the blockage environment is around you, lower will be your DL. Right? Naturally, the probability of being in line of sight to be, I mean, it will be only true for, it will be 1 only for very closely located base stations. And lower the beta, higher would be the value of DL. So in literature, the value of beta, if people have given you, there are many ways to calculate DL. And it's not a it's not a hard and fast rule, and it's derived on the basis of some kind of equivalence, which means if you think about the average number of line of sight base stations that a typical user is observing by this beta model, right? Which means you will have to use this Campbell's theorem using this new marked point process. So it's the summation of all the points on an average that you are visualizing when each of these points have been marked with probability PR, right? So you are only considering the line of sight points, and you equate it with the probability of being in, or the average number of points that you are seeing in line of sight using this DL model, right? You can also do an equivalence between the probability of not seeing a base station at all. So for example, this is the probability of not seeing a base station at all in line of sight. Using this model, DL model, so if we use this probability of so PLOSR, so this is the LOS ball model, which means the probability that phi L, right, has no points. So here again I'm using it as the counting measure. is simply e to the power minus pi lambda dl square, because from the perspective of the typical user located at origin, I have drawn a circle of radius dl, which is this guy, and saying that if a point falls inside this circle, I will say that that point is line of sight, and if a point falls outside this circle, I will call that point as it is in non-line of sight. So similar to what I think Vaibhav was mentioning, that if you are located within a distance, you consider it as line of sight. If you are located outside that distance, you consider it as non-line of sight. So that is precisely the LOS ball model. Right? And a way to derive this DL, the value of DL for a given value of beta, is that you can do an equivalence of the probability of seeing no line of sight base stations. The probability of seeing no line of sight base stations using the LOS ball model is precisely that no point falls inside this circle, which is e to the minus pi lambda dl square, and you equate it with your actual value of this probability, which is you equate it with exp of minus 2 pi lambda integral of e to the minus beta t dt, where t goes from 0 to infinity. Right. So here, okay, there is one point that I had missed in between. So this is the probability of not observing any point within a distance of x, right? And if I put x equal to infinity, what would happen? What would I actually calculate? It is the probability of there existing no line of sight base stations throughout the network, which means out of all these possible distances of these base stations going from 0 to infinity, none of them are in line of sight. Do you get this point? I'll just write it in case you miss it. So x equal to infinity. So substituting we get the probability that the typical user observes no line of sight base stations. Okay. Now if we find out or substitute this actual value of this probability, it becomes this, and we equate these two, we would find out DL in terms of beta. Is this clear? Or does anyone have any question? Yes, no?
So, sir, we just utilize beta in this place to express DL in terms of it, and then rest of the place we just use DL.
Exactly. Rest of the place you use DL and use simply this probability of being in line of sight.
Like, why is this done for like ease of calculation or something?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you even at the first place you start off with calculating this thing, this already creates a lot of nightmare.
Yes.
Okay. So you see that this is of the form of gamma functions, right? T to the n e to the power minus t dt,
Yes, sir.
right? So e to the power minus gamma functions later on creates a lot of issues. And in general, it's a good abstraction because it's naturally true. Because if you go to a random place inside the city and you just look around you, you would see that you would only see a base station within a line of sight only if it is closer than a certain distance. Otherwise, it goes beyond the buildings, right? So in a urban network over the two-dimensional area, it's a good abstraction. Okay. When we will be calculating, let's say, the follow-up results, which is a sign coverage probability and so on, especially if we want to calculate the association probabilities to start with. So that would create a lot of nightmare if we keep on using this model. Does this clarify?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, I mean, let's look at, to answer your question, let's look at these, a few of these equations at first. And you can try to prove it at home as well. So given a typical user observes at least one line of sight base station, if we try to find out the conditional density function of its distance to the nearest line of sight base station, let's call it FL of x. So this is the density of the distance. So let's call it the PDF. The PDF of the distance to the nearest line of sight base stations, joint with the probability that there exists such a base station. Of course, you can only find out, or this PDF is valid in case one such base station exists, which means later on, as I had discussed previously for the ring example, you have to multiply it with the probability that there exists such a base station like this. But for the moment, we are considering the joint probability that such a base station exists, and we are actually multiplying with the probably we are finding out the PDF of its distance from the typical user. So this simply becomes, I mean, you can proceed in the same manner. Remember that when we were trying to find out the distance to the nearest base station for a typical Poisson point process, we were simply finding out the void probability, which is e to the minus pi lambda x square, and saying that this is the CCDF of this point because this is the probability that the distance 1 is greater than x. Naturally, the CDF at x is simply 1 minus e to the minus pi lambda x square, and you differentiate it with respect to x, and you find out the distance distribution, right? So you proceed in the same lines. So we would find out that the probability to the PDF of the distance to this nearest line of sight base station is simply 2 pi lambda p x e to the power minus 2 pi lambda 0 to x, let's say t pt dt. Okay, try to prove this thing. Okay, it follows in the same manner. You would say that the nearest point is outside x, then use this function or try to find this function with respect to x, differentiate it with respect to x, and find out what it would be. Okay. I hope you all are aware of how to do the differentiation under the integral sign. Is everyone okay with it? Yes, no? Is there anyone who is not able to do the differentiation under the integral sign?
So this expression that we have got is just that 1 minus that above expression and then different. So 1 minus will go away. So it's just right, like x
Yeah, yeah.
differentiate the integral, the x will go inside, like that expression will come up. So tpt will become xpx. Like that's only you have done, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean you have to differentiate with respect to x of integral of 0 to x tpt as well, right?
yes,
So x
yeah,
goes in.
yes, that's why that xpx term has come.
Yeah, exactly. Is it okay for everyone? Yes, no? Is there someone who has a problem with this, or everything is okay? So in case you are not able to derive it, just search differentiation under the integral sign. I think it's called Leibniz rule or something. I don't know. I mean, it simply says that if you have a function from fx to gx and you want to find a differentiation with respect to x of a function, let's say capital F of x and t, which goes from dt. So this so is everyone does it? Okay, I'll not proceed to discuss this in case everybody knows this. Is there anyone who doesn't know how to do this? Okay, yeah, I think everybody knows. So let's just skip it. Okay, so we have found out the distance distribution of the nearest line of sight base station from the typical user. Similarly, if we replace p by 1 minus p, we would find out the distance distribution of the nearest non-line of sight base station from the typical user. So which is lambda 1 minus px e to the power minus 2 pi lambda integral of 0 to x r, or let's say t 1 minus pt dt, right? Okay, so now we have the distance distribution to the nearest line of sight base station, distance distribution to the nearest non-line of sight base station, And if you want to find out the conditional distribution or the conditional density function of the distance to the line of sight base station such that it observes at least one line of sight base station, we would simply have to find out, this is the joint probability, so the conditional probability would be simply FLX divided by some BL. BL represents the probability that at least one LOS BS exists. Okay, and similarly, if you want to find out the conditional distribution of the nearest non-line of sight base station, given that there is at least one non-line of sight base station, you would simply do Fnx by some Bn. Bn is simply the probability that there exists at least one non-line of sight base station, right? It goes in the same manner as we had done before, which is 1 minus e to the minus 2 pi lambda integral of r 1 minus PR dr 0 to infinity, right? So this is the probability that no non-line of sight base station exists. This is the probability that at least one non-line of sight base station exists, and we proceed as follows. Okay, now that we have discussed this line of sight and non-line of sight base station distance distributions, the first question that arises is what is the probability of association? So probability of association to the line of sight tire and the non-line of sight tire. Now I can keep on making your, yeah.
So in the above derivations also we haven't used the DL idea, right? We are still using the P.
Yeah, that's the point I was just coming to.
Okay.
That I can keep on making your life hard and still use these expressions, right? But let's not go there. Let's make our life easier and straight away start using the line of sight ball model that we have been using. Okay, now remember some characteristics which I have talked about in the previous class, that what happens due to why modeling blockage is important, because the propagation of these high frequency waves when you are in direct line of sight to the transmitting element versus when your line of sight to the transmitting element is blocked by an obstacle, it changes in the nature of the path loss model that we would be using. So for line of sight, we would be using the received power at a distance of r is simply, so r we have used as rate, so let me just do PR or P capital R or something. At a distance of r is simply k P transmitted r to the minus alpha. Okay, we will have some gain terms. I have not come to that yet, but let me just put in this term G at this moment, but I'll come to this in just in a while. Okay, for non-line of sight, we still have PR at a distance of r as GKPT r to the minus alpha n. Okay, so notice here that PT of course doesn't change. It is the transmit power of the base station, right? G doesn't change. It is the directivity gain of the beamforming that I will be discussing in a while. K also doesn't change because it's a frequency dependent parameter which dictates what is the path loss in free space in 1 meter that you would observe in case such a frequency transmission occurs. So G, K and PT have nothing to do with whether a blockage is present or not. The only thing that changes based on whether a blockage is present or not is this final distance dependent term, which is r to the minus alpha. Alpha is different for line of sight and alpha is different for non-line of sight. Okay. In the previous class, I had also discussed that alpha L typical values is around 2, alpha N typical values are around 4. Okay. In our calculations, if we keep on using, and this is an important point, so the point is, that of course you will always assume r to be greater than equal to 1, right? Because otherwise we go into that problem of singularity at r equal to 0, or the case that we are receiving higher power than what we have transmitted uh, within r equal to 1, right? So those are the things that we are not dealing with. The important point here is that, do you remember, does anyone remember why alpha equal to 2 was a problem in our let's say single tier networks?
Sir, interference.
Yeah, so interference, number of interferers were growing quadratically as we were moving in distance, right? And the impact that each of such interferers was creating was proportional to r square, so r to the minus 2, sorry, inversely proportional to r square. And as a result, when we were doing the summation, and Campbell's theorem told us that interference would go to infinity if we keep on doing alpha equal to 2, right? But here alpha equal to 2 is, or alpha L equal to 2 is not an issue, let's say, put it in quotes, because first of all we are not anyways going to deal with it for the entire infinite plane, because alpha L is only valid until the line of sight ball radius. I mean, even if you introduce some PR, which is a function of distance, which is not a line of sight ball model, you would see that the number of interferers are not, as a result, growing quadratically as you go with distance. They would grow as a function of quadratic multiplied by some exponential. But that's a complicated matter. We are not dealing with it. We are simply restricting ourselves to the line of sight ball model, and hence alpha L equal to 2 is not an issue. And that's why we will be actually regularly taking alpha L equal to 2, just to simplify some notations. But just to give you an idea, if you go to look into 3GPP documents, specifically the 38.900 series, so in your browser, if you directly type 38.900, you will find out what I am talking about. It will give you the link. The first link would be the link to the 3GPP specifications. You can download it, the Word file, and search for uh, path loss models, and there you would see that for line of sight they prescribe somewhat around 2.3 to 2.4, something like this, whereas this is around 3.6 onwards. But to get a brief idea of how to do quick calculations, we will go ahead with these assumptions. Okay, so now if alpha L is equal to 2 and alpha N equal to 4, can you agree when I do a claim? So the claim is for the line of sight ball model, right? In case a line of sight base station exists, its downlink received power is greater than all non-line of sight base stations. Do you agree with this point? It's simple, right? So since in the line of sight ball model, what do we have with the model? It says that in case there is a line of sight base stations, necessarily its distance is less than dl. In case there is a non-line of sight base station, necessarily its distance is greater than dl. So let's call dl1 the nearest line of sight base station, or any line of sight base station for that matter, and dn1 to be the nearest non-line of sight base station. We necessarily have dn1 greater than dl1. Yes, because why? Because dn1 is greater than equal to dl, and dl1 is less than dl, right? So in case this is true, which means that dl1 is less than dn1, it necessarily means that dl1 to the power any alpha is greater than dn1 to the power any alpha. Just stop me at any instant you are not able to follow, okay? And if this is true, we have dl1 to the power any alpha is necessarily greater than dn1 to the power any alpha plus epsilon. Yeah. And since alpha n is greater than alpha L, we have necessarily dl1 to the minus alpha L is necessarily greater than dn1 to the alpha n, right? So if this is true and p, g and k remain the same, what we just have to find out is whether a line of sight base station exists or not. In case at least one of such base station exists, you will always connect to a line of sight base station in this model, which means in this two-dimensional model, forcing a non-line of sight line of sight ball model to model the visibility state. Note that in the e to the power minus beta model, beta r model, this is not necessarily true, right? Why can it not necessarily be true? Because you can have a base station at, let's say, 1 meter, and it is still probably removed due to being in non-line of sight. Not removed, but it is in non-line of sight because it's a probabilistic thing, right? So it can happen that it is still a stronger base station as far as this user is concerned with respect to another base station located at 10 meter still being in line of sight, which means that if this guy is in line of sight and this guy is in non-line of sight, then it might happen that this guy is actually providing the larger received power, okay? But with the LOS ball model, we say that everyone within a certain distance is line of sight and outside that certain distance is non-line of sight. We are actually dealing with a simpler issue. So I'll give you as a homework, and I mean, I'm telling you it as a homework, but of course, when I upload the paper, the proof is directly there. It's a couple of lines of proof that what you have to find out is the probability of connecting or associating to the line of sight tire in case the probability of being in line of sight as a function of distance is simply e to the minus beta r. Okay, I hope the question is clear. Okay, if it is clear, let me quickly move on to the other aspect of modeling that we would be using. Remember that we are following in the same footsteps which we have done before, right? So in a network, the first thing that a user is to be concerned about is with which tire it is going to associate to. In case of a similar two-tire network consisting of small cells and macro base stations, we had found out the probability of connecting to tire 1 versus tire 2. Here we are just interested in finding out the probability of associating to line of sight tire versus non-line of sight tire. Why this difference? Because the path losses or the path loss modelings are different, so they can be considered as independent tires from each other, right? Where one is focused around you within a ball of radius dl, the others are concentrated outside that ball of radius dl. Okay, the other model, yeah,
Sir, can you go up to the question, homework question?
yeah,
Okay, so okay, in that beta model, we have to find that probability.
right, exactly. So that's what I was discussing here, right? It might happen that if you are located closer, you are still in non-line of sight,
Yes, sir.
right? And as a result, it might happen that that non-line of sight base station, because of its close proximity, is giving you a higher received power, even though here
Yeah,
dn, yeah, okay,
there just the alpha is getting affected, but still the D can be.
small, yeah.
And sir,
Mhm.
still like the non line of sight and line of sight, still they are like doing co-channel transmission, right? So like they were
Yeah.
interfere with each other.
Exactly. So in case you are associating with the line of sight base station, when you calculate the SINR and the SINR coverage probability, the interference is coming from both the tires, line of sight tire and the non-line of sight tire. Okay, so that's this additional nuance that we will be modeling now. It's to say that not actually all of the base stations will be interfering. So that brings us to the beamforming model. So let me just go right up and copy this guy and bring it down here. So does everyone have an idea of, or does all have an idea of how beamforming occurs? So let me see what happened. I go below here and paste it here. Okay. So this is the pattern of an antenna or an antenna array. Can someone quickly recap for all of us? How do you do directional transmission? Anyone? We had talked about this in one of the classes, I guess. So the problem of doing, or the motivation of doing beamforming arose due to the fact that, as I mentioned, that millimeter waves or these high frequency transmissions are very, I mean, their path losses are very detrimental, which means even if you want to communicate over a distance of, let's say, 100 200 meters, the signal dies down very quickly, right? So in case of our omnidirectional transmissions, which means if you have a base station like this and it is radiating around it in all directions with equal power, right, which would generally be the case for sub gigahertz transmissions, not sub 6 gigahertz. Note that many 2.3, 2.6, and let's say 3.5, these transmissions have beamforming associated with them. But classical, let's say 700, 800, 900 megahertz transmissions, if you transmit it in omnidirectional manner, right, your energy, of course it dissipates as something 1 by distance to the power 2, but its energy, since it is being radiated across all distances and the path losses are detrimental, even a user which is located very far, or located, let's say, of the order of hundreds of meters from the base station, gets actually very small received power in case of millimeter wave transmissions. So as a result, what these base stations should do is, instead of radiating in all directions equally, it would try to focus its energy towards the intended user, right? So we would be, and simultaneously, since the power is limited, the power located at the side lobes and the hind lobe would be smaller. So you would be actually doing something called beamforming, which is of this red colored model. Can someone now tell me, how do you achieve this? How do you achieve a let's say substantial gain on one of the directions of transmission as compared to nullifying the powers radiated in other directions?
So I'm not sure,
So
but I
using interference patterns.
Okay,
yeah,
lot of
maybe I
options.
think
Array of
One at a
and
time. One at a time. Yeah. So let's go alphabetically. Arnav, yes.
I think it is done because means it's done changing the phase of different uh, waves in the different direction and focusing on the same direction, and then that interference thing is means constructive interference create this directional beam.
Right.
That is what I
Yeah.
think.
I mean
Not
that's true. Okay. So let me just go into the detail of it a bit. So if you have a radiating element which is transmitting omnidirectionally, so this guy is transmitting omnidirectionally, you would not be able to do beamforming with this radiating element. Okay. In case there is a hard stop behind it, I mean, I'm not going into the details of antennas, but you would have antenna radiating elements which radiate in this manner, right? Okay. So if you put another radiating element beside it, right, you would be able to have interfering signals by changing the phases of these two individual radiating elements, right? So as a result, if you want to generate some kind of far field pattern at a certain distance, what you would be doing is actually tuning. So you would tune the phase of transmission of these individual elements. So what does it mean by tuning the phase? Can anyone explain? So let's go next alphabetically. So Badri, yes, you were saying something for
Yes.
directional transmission. Yes.
I mean, I was also saying the same thing, like the array of antennas where we uh, uh, not exactly how we tune, like I, if I remember correctly, like uh, based on the distance between them, how like far apart physically they are, we have like path difference which creates a phase difference in their uh,
Right.
and the desired direction. Based on that we tune, like
That's true. I mean, this what you're mentioning is absolutely true, that the phase difference is created by the path difference. So if you, I don't know if you have any course of antennas here. I don't think there is, right? Maybe Shobha teaches one. No, I don't know. So what happens is that you have either pin diodes or varactors behind these antenna elements, or delay lines. Right? So what you do is the incoming wave, right? You delay it by different amount within these two antenna radiating elements, and as a result this delay of time creates a delay in the phase, so creates a delay in the path. So if you go back to our basics of Young's double slit experiment, if you can model, or if you can control the distance between the two slits, you can actually control the interference pattern. So basically that is the same physics going on here, that you tune the delay lines in such a way that you create such a phase difference between these two radiating elements, such that they probably create constructive interference in one of the directions and create destructive interference on the other directions. Okay, so that's the basic principle. The more such antenna elements that you have with yourself, the finer the beam you would be able to create, because you have now so many new variables to tune this far field pattern. And as a result, you would have something like this red pattern, where this guy is called the main lobe and these guys are called together the side lobes. I know that I mean technically this guy is called the hind lobe, but let's not go into that. So all of these things we will consider as to be the side lobes, and the main direction where you are transmitting, or I don't know if it is technically called the bore side direction, is called the main lobe, right? It has a generic far field pattern associated to it. But again, since we are dealing with simplistic models, we would be approximating it with this black colored outline, which means what? Our gain with respect to theta will be equal to some main lobe gain, right? So if, for example, okay, theta is the beam width, so let's call it phi. So this is the direction of phi. So it is m when phi is less than greater than minus theta by 2 and less than theta, and it is small m otherwise, which means that if it is transmitting in this direction within minus theta and plus theta of that direction, right, it has a gain of m, and outside that it has a gain of small m. That's just an abstraction to model the far field pattern of this main lobe and the side lobe. Okay, so is this clear for the moment? I mean, how do we go from the red one to the black one? Okay, if this is clear, now you can we can come back to the discussion we were having in the at the end of the last class, where I was saying that if a user is connected to a base station. By the way, why? I mean, this is not a very new concept. Okay, beamforming has been existing for a long time now, but why now it has become interesting? Does anyone remember uh, the dependence of an antenna element with respect to the frequency of transmission or the wavelength more
The
directly?
wavelength, lambda by 2 or lambda by 4 it is
Right.
actually.
So larger the wavelength, more is the size of the antenna that you need, right? So when we are going for these higher frequency transmissions, it's an important point to note. When I can write it down here, and in case, let's say, some interviewer of a company, or let's say for your higher studies, asks you that why massive MIMO and millimeter wave and these things have become so hot topics, right? The very idea is this, right? So since the antenna elements or antenna element sizes vary inversely with frequency, right? For high frequency transmissions, the sizes of the antenna elements are very small, right? As a result, it is now possible. This implies that
Sir, I think your network is not stable. Your voice is not audible.
uh, yeah, sorry, I think I lost my connection in between. You guys can hear me now, right?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yeah. So since I mean, as I was mentioning, that beamforming as a concept is nothing new. I mean, having constructive and destructive interference with two or
Sir,
a
it's
series of
breaking again.
elements, right? It's not something. Okay, I think there is still a problem. So let me do this. Just 1 second. So let me mute in this guy. To unmute here. So you can hear me now, right? I hope.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if it's audible, so let's continue. So again, to repeat it for the third time, um, since this beamforming concept is of course nothing new, but why it has become interesting now? Because we are transmitting with high frequencies, and as a result, the antenna element sizes has become very small. As a result, it is now possible to pack a lot of antennas together at a very closed area or very small area. For example, the beamforming concept is not only going to be used inside in the base station side, but also in the user side, which means this will be your transmitting beam, and the user will employ some kind of receiving beam to get that connection. Okay. Um, since we have moved on to, as I mentioned, we have moved on to these high frequencies. Now we have gone ahead of simply uniform linear arrays, and now there have been planar arrays of let's say 64, 128, or 256 antenna elements packed together inside a very small area. Even in your mobile phone, you can nowadays have 8 antenna elements packed together inside your inside the planar array. Okay. So to come back to our discussion, for a user which is getting connected to a base station, we will say that the main lobe of the transmitting or the associated base station is directed towards this user. Okay. But it can happen that the interfering base stations are at the same time transmitting to some other users located at some other direction. Okay. So again, I think my internet is so bad that it is not rendering. Can you guys hear me, or did I lose you?
Yes, sir, you're on.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, I'm audible, but my screen is probably not responding. So I'm drawing it. Okay. So yeah, this is what I was mentioning, that this is your, let's say, transmitting base station, or let's say signal power. And this is your interfering base station. The gist of it, which we will continue in the next class from, is the fact that all interfering base stations are not actually equal, which means that the interfering base stations which are transmitting to users like this, such interfering base stations, we will have to account for the interference coming from their main lobe. And such interfering base stations, we have to account for the interference that is coming from their side lobe. But since we do not know where at a certain instant where all the interfering base stations are transmitting towards which users, we will again form a probabilistic model saying that any given interferer, let's say this guy, I, would create an interference with their main lobe with a probability of theta by 2 pi, and an interference with their side lobe with a probability of 2 pi minus theta by 2 pi. Whereas the serving base station, okay, this is not implied by. The serving base station would always be assumed to be directed towards the intended user, whereas the interfering base stations would be assumed to be directed towards the intended user with a probability of theta by 2 pi. Why theta by 2 pi? Because we have seen that the probability that the typical user lies inside this main lobe of the beam is given by theta by the total possibility, which is of 2 pi, and this is 2 pi minus theta, and the probability that you are actually having to look at the side lobe of the beam is 2 pi minus theta by 2 pi. Is this concept clear? I mean, it's a very straightforward one, but it will come into account.
Just gain model, the one which will be you have mentioned about, that will be using MM.
Yeah, we will be using this guy. We will have some value of M, which is probably, let's say, of the order of 40 dB or something. And this is a smaller value, which is probably minus 10 dB, or even, I mean, even if you consider 0 dB.
Because otherwise this would be like function of theta, right? But we are
Right. So, I mean, although this, you're absolutely correct. I mean, this red one is a function of theta, yes. But we are windowing it or multiplying it with a gate or something, it's saying that it's still a function of theta. But are you are you asking about what is the value of M based on theta?
yes.
Yes, so that is something which we are not yet started to discuss. For the moment, we will have some value of M in case you are located within theta, and in case you are outside of theta, you would have some other value of small m. But you are absolutely right in pointing out the fact that in case theta is smaller, you would actually have a larger gain. So something like this, right? And as you go on to make it smaller and smaller, you would have resulted in larger and larger gain. So this is M2 and this is M3. You make the beam more and more focused, the larger you gain towards your intended direction. Is this, if this is what you were asking, this is something which we will be
Yes.
studying as an add-on thing later when we have discussed using this simple model. So what just remains for us is just to keep in mind that M is a function of theta. But for the moment, we will say that capital M is some large value around 40 dB in the main lobe, and it is some small value, let's say minus 10 dB or something in the side lobe. Okay, so when we are calculating the SINR coverage probability instant, yeah, Sauradeep.
No, sir, you finish and then I'll.
Okay, so when we are calculating the SINR coverage probability instantaneously, and we are finding out whether the instantaneous SINR is greater than that threshold or not, we would be counting for each of these interference terms probabilistically, which means with each term of the interference, which is n0 plus summation of I, we will calculate the probability of it being in line, or it being in the main lobe, plus some I dash with the probability of it being in the side lobe, which is 1 minus Pm. So this would account for each of these individual interfering elements. Of course, you can have different types of combinations. You can have main lobe combination, which means a user which is transmitting towards this direction, right? And a base station which is transmitting towards direction would have a multi. So suppose these are all interfering base stations. So this guy is an interfering base station. This guy is another interfering base station. So suppose this guy is transmitting here. So this would create a lower value of interference than this base station, right? So this I1 would be a multiplication of small m versus capital M. Because why capital M? It's because of this main lobe of the main base station, and sorry, capital M because of this typical user, and the small m due to the hind lobe of this user, of this base station. And this guy would be creating a larger interference of the order of capital M into capital M. But of course, it's not the same power from the user side and the transmitter side, and that's what we will start our discussion from in the next class. Before completing, there is one more important point which we are for the moment neglecting, but we will come back to it again when we have finished the millimeter wave module. Is that when a user comes into the network, right? It has to do something called an initial access, which means it has to exchange some signals with the base station to facilitate this connection. Now, since each of these base stations is transmitting directionally towards all directions, suppose this guy, this base station is serving this user, and a user has come here. Since this base station is focusing its energy towards this direction, it might not always be possible for this base station to discover users like this. So occasionally, for control channeling or control signaling, each base station does something called a beam sweep, which means it tries out all possible directions of its beam, right, across all possible directions to find out if there are new users which have come into the network. But this concept, that of initial access, and from the perspective of the user, it's called cell discovery. These concepts we will be coming back to when we have finished our millimeter wave module. For the moment, we assume a certain initial access procedure which already exists with these base stations. Yes, Sauradeep, you had a question.
So yes, I was asking about this beam tracking or beam sweeping thing only. So I was asking that if there's an user within the distance, but the base station is beamforming and thus transmitting signal in completely another direction,
Right.
then even if the user is within the range, that user won't get covered, right?
Right. So that's a very good.
Unless we do beam sweeping of this type.
Right.
And
There's
even
a-
if we do, if they are located in other directions, then we cannot transmit signal to both the users at the same time, right?
You can actually you can do multi-beam transmission, which means that you would have 64 antenna elements, right? You just employ 32 to do beamforming towards one direction and the other 32 to do beamforming in some other direction.
Okay, sir.
Okay, but that question that you asked is a very important one, and that is the main motivation to your projects which you were discussing, the final, let's say, fifth and sixth topic, or the fourth and fifth topic. I don't know, the last two projects, right? In those projects, we will be discussing these things. Is that why locating the user which means positioning the user becomes a very important task at this point, which means that even if you have a very vague idea of where the user is, it might not be good enough. So for example, a base station, sorry, discovers that a user is located here, right? And it has, suppose it is this one dimensional line, and it has several possibilities of beamforming. So let us call this guy as beam 1 with theta 1, this guy to be at beam 2 with theta 2, and so on, right? So it has to actually locate where this user is in order to allocate it the particular beam option. So it is not always true that a base station is able to do a continuous sweep of the beam. So from a conceptual perspective, it might look like a continuous sweep of the beam, but what the base station is actually doing is finding, I mean, it has, let's say, these possible options of beam, and it is just uh, switching between all these possible options and looking from which possible option it is getting the best received power, and just doing allocating that beam to the user, right? It's not a continuous domain sweeping. In order to do a 360-degree continuous beam sweeping, you would need a huge number of elements, right? The restricted number of elements, it's only a few possible options that you can do. We will come to this discussion a bit later on, and what is the difference between digital beamforming and analog beamforming, and combining them with a something called hybrid beamforming, which is a core 5G technology. We will start our discussion from this at the end of uh, the module, where we have already characterized the SINR coverage probability. So yes, both your questions are valid. When a user comes into the network, what are good mechanisms to allocate it a beam? That means, how does a base station discover that a user has come into the network? The second point still remains that even if a user has been detected, it has to be precisely located in order for it to get allocated a proper beam. After doing this both procedures, it can still happen that there is things called beam misalignment and beam selection error, these kind of errors which can occur, which means that can still be possible that the intended user is lying actually outside the beam. So these additional things we will be discussing probably after the midsem. Okay. Any other questions? If not, we can probably close today. Thank you, guys. I'll upload this paper and the recording. Just go through it, and you would have a very, easy time for the next class.
So one more thing.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at present, do mobile phone supports this beamforming at their end? Means if
So
they
all
are
the
in
5G native mobile phones have beamforming right now. Okay. So
right now.
although they have beamforming capabilities associated with them, they can only use it when they are configured with a 5G base station or a millimeter wave base station, right? But as I was mentioning, you can still have 5G which is not millimeter wave, right? So there is sub 6 gigahertz transmissions which are still 5G, like 2 point something G and 2 point something gigahertz or 3 point something gigahertz. There can still be let's say directional transmission, but might not be directional reception. It only becomes interesting in these very high frequency ranges, where in order to overcome the path loss, you need to have directional transmission and receptions from both the ends.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
You can do beamforming as long as you have multiple antenna elements.
Okay, sir. And so one more thing, can you please post the last office hours video, because I've joined 2-3 minutes late, and till then you've explained the main point about that.
I see.
Hours.
Okay. I'll upload that video as well. Okay. By the way, what you guys can search in case you are curious about this millimeter wave and beamforming. What you can search is something called YGig. So, okay, let me again share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what you can search is something called YGig. And okay, as a first study, you can just directly go to its Wikipedia page. So it is and we will not be talking about this, since in our course, as I mentioned, we will be focusing on cellular networks, which means all the 3GPP standards and our network operators like Reliance and Jio, and these things, or Airtel, these things would be interesting for us. We will not be talking about IEEE standards, which is our Wi-Fi standards, but parallel development of millimeter wave hardware, millimeter wave technology has been taking place in the IEEE standards as well, which means your home Wi-Fi routers. And WiGig, alternatively known as 60 gigahertz Wi-Fi, is a technology which brings in millimeter wave transmissions for your local area network, which is your Wi-Fi transmitters. So it has a lot of, let's say, very cool applications like wireless HDMI and so on. Does anyone use wireless HDMI? I mean, at least all of us, at least I use HDMI cables while connecting to the screens, right? So WiGi enables you to have wireless HDMI features, which means you would have ultra high HD quality transmission of video uh, from your device, like the laptop, to your screen with which you are connected to, wirelessly, ultra high HD transmissions. Okay, which was not possible before, which was only possible through cables before. So I'll encourage you to look up WiGig and possibly wireless HDMI, and look at these, look at which frequency ranges they operate in, what are their standards, and whether they do beamforming and so on. Okay, just one side note. Okay, thank you,
As
guys.
well, I get two things,
Yeah.
if you have time.
Mhm.
So, first thing that for the last quiz, will we have a discussion on the next class? I had some doubts
We
here.
can, yeah, I mean, it was very straightforward. I have not seen your uh, answer sheets yet, but I have, I mean, quickly gone through a couple of them, and it looks okay for almost all of you, right? So it was
No,
not a
sir,
very
it was
difficult.
simple, but the calculation part, it was not getting solved. The integral was not getting solved. Means it was
Right,
not
right,
giving
and
a proper right value.
right. Right. So that's why I mentioned during the quiz as well that as long as you follow the I mean methods that are required, it should be okay, and the final value hardly matters. Okay. So that's not something you should be worried about.
No, sir,
Actually,
actually, the
yes,
accuracy parts were based on the first value. So about
Okay.
that
Okay.
means
So
we do not get
let
a
me let me look into this and see if there is something which was missing from my
yes,
end.
that's what I was asking, sir. Actually, are we expected to use MATLAB and Trapzi to do these type of calculations on the fly?
No, no, no.
For-
I mean, ideally, you should be able to, but I would not expect you to do it in the quiz.
Okay.
Okay.
And
But I would,
sir, for the mid sem, are we having a long duration thing where we are supposed
no,
to do all
I
this?
don't. I mean, if you want something like that, that's a different matter. But I would not. I mean, not go into that part. I mean, let's keep things simple, where I would just give the question paper beforehand to you. Probably, I'll schedule it already, and just. I mean, it will be half an hour, 45 minutes of quiz, but the time would be allotted to you about 1 hour or 1 hour 30 minutes or something. It's similar to the quiz. Okay, it's not a big deal. Okay. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you, sir.